Cześć! Już za chwilę zobaczycie pierwszą część mojego wywiadu z Andym Powellem, czyli wokalistą, gitarzystą, kompozytorem, a przede wszystkim współzałożycielem zespołu Wishbone Ash, który to zespół miał ogromny wpływ na rozwój muzyki rockowej, między innymi przez zastosowanie partii dwóch gitar prowadzących, grających unisono i w harmoniach. Andy Powell jest jedynym muzykiem oryginalnego składu tego zespołu, który nadal z nim występuje, nagrywa. Kompozycje zespołu Wishbone Ash to takie klasyki rocka jak chociażby Persephone, Lady Whiskey, Blind Eye, King Will Come, Warrior i wiele, wiele innych znakomitych utworów. Wishbone Ash miało wpływ na twórczość takich zespołów jak chociażby Judas Priest, Maiden, Van Halen, Lynyrd Skynyrd. Andy Powell to kopalnia wiedzy, który przez przeszło 50, prawie 60 lat swojej działalności muzycznej przeżył niejedno i ma mnóstwo ciekawych historii do opowiedzenia. Zatem zapraszam Was na pierwszą część mojej rozmowy z Andym Powellem. Miłego oglądania. Cissy Houston, the mother of Whitney Houston, was also backing singer and great singer herself, and she also recorded few albums. She also sang on Wishbone Ash album, Locked In. Do you remember this cooperation? Because yeah, she was great singer, mother of the great singer, of course.
Absolutely.
So can you say something about her singing the backing vocals for?
Yeah, well, we had a very famous producer by the name of Tom Dowd.
Mhm.
And Tom Dowd recommended, we wanted to have some backing vocals on these songs. And he recommended Cissy. And so we had not met her before then. But she came down and sang beautifully and did the sessions really quickly. And, she sung for many, many years in a church, gospel. And so, that's how these singers become so great, because they sing in gospel choirs.
Mhm.
And I think maybe Whitney did the same as a little girl, I think, as well. So, yeah, it was very, very nice collaboration.
Generally, as you said, mostly the backing singers, as we can say, the black, for example, singers from the 50s, 60s, they are mostly begin their careers in churches, yeah, in a gospel, as a gospel, yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, yeah.
But in England, it was different, I can say, because there was other culture. I can say, I don't know how to say about it. But in England, for example, you started your career, for example, playing in school bands. You gather this experience differently than in America, yeah.
Yeah. Although in England, you're learning. It was mandatory when you were growing up at my age to have religious, like a small assembly in the school before school. So you learn some classical music, you learn some traditional hymns, and then you also learn to do some country music as well. English folk music. You learn those songs. So there was some deeper cultural impact, and that comes out in our music. If you listen to some of our early music, you can hear these kind of references, and every English child at that age grew up with some kind of knowledge of religious tradition,
Mhm. Yeah, as you say about country, I can say it's skiffle. The skiffle music was very important, yeah, for you, yeah.
It was
Donegan.
it was a big. Yeah,
Yeah.
Lonnie Donegan. That was when we first started to think about popular music as kids, and we realized it could be a lot of fun making this handmade music, So skiffle, and then through the 50s and 60s, Chuck Berry, and then for me the music of the Ventures and the Shadows, in particular Hank Marvin, that became my big influence as far as learning the guitar. And then I used to make my own guitars at school, and at home, I made a few guitars, and that's how I learned how the guitar worked and how to become proficient on it. Making my own instruments, and like Brian May is famous for that. But we also did it. Everybody kind of did it in the 50s and 60s. And so it's all part of the handmade music concept of that time.
As you mentioned, Shadows in the Ventures, yeah, this was the first bands I can say that used the twin guitars playing, yeah, in England, I can say. So I think
Yeah,
it was influence for you as a Wishbone Ash, yeah.
yeah,
This
yeah, yeah. I mean, everything went into the pot. I mean, when we formed the band, I mean, I played in soul bands when I was in my teens, so I was used to working just playing rhythm guitar in the background, and then all of the lead lines would be done by the horns, and so I was used to listening to these guys trying to work out these harmonies, and
Mhm,
then when we formed Wishbone Ash, I
mhm,
said, well, if you can't decide between the two guitar players, why don't we use the two guitar players like a horn section? And the
mhm.
first song we wrote was the song Blind Eye, and
Yeah.
Matthew Fisher from Procol Harum on piano. And the first song we wrote had this, it sounded like a horn line. Ba-ba-da, ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. That's
Yeah.
a horn line played on guitar. So, it was easier than having 6 people or 7 people in a band to just have 4 people and then create these little sections of music, that would punctuate the music, make it more melodic and make it more interesting, and create our own sound into the bargain.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you mentioned, we mentioned Shadows, but in England, in America also, there was this band, for example, Paul Butterfield, I can say. Oh, Allman
Yeah.
Brothers band, of course. Yeah, the Southern Rocks band.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
We
Alan
were
Johnson.
we
Yeah.
weren't we weren't really aware of the Allman Brothers until we went to America and they put us on the same bill as the
Mhm.
Allman Brothers. And we went, oh wow, this is cool. This is like a southern version of what we're trying to do. But we didn't know who they were. But they were fantastic with the twin leads. Yeah, absolutely.
Other American bands from this time that inspired you as a Wishbone Ash, for example. There
Well,
was.
we played with so many bands at that time. I mean, Steppenwolf was one early heavy metal band, if you want to think about it that way. Doobie Brothers, Three Dog Night.
Yeah,
We're going back to the '60s now.
yeah.
And then in my first really big opening slot was with The Who,
Who?
and Pete Townsend was also always a huge influence to me.
Mhm,
And not particularly as a lead guitar player, but as a rhythm player and as a heavy player.
mhm,
And but we saw many American bands, and I always loved it when we would meet bands like the Doobie Brothers or Little Feat or someone like that. And ZZ Top used to open for us when we would go to Texas, and then we'd open for them. Same thing with Aerosmith; they opened for us, and then we would open for them.
mhm.
And it was a great inspiration.
Choose one anecdote. It's hard, I know it's hard because it's a lot of long career. Any funny anecdotes from this period when back when you play with such bands like you say The Who, Aerosmith, etc. Can you mention something that comes to your mind now? For example, for Who or anyway, any of these bands.
Well, I mean, there's so many adventures. I mean, if you wanted to have real rock and roll, when we went down
Yeah.
south, I mean, bands like Black Oak, Arkansas, I mean, they were doing crazy hotel stuff before any of the bands that you hear about today. Some of these southern bands were crazy. But the Who, I mean, Keith Moon, one night, I mean, he broke into our room. I was in bed with my wife. He came in with a gun, an automatic, we call it machine gun. I mean, he was crazy. He was blowing up toilets, and we saw all of that. And this crazy groupie scene, and we met all the groupies. Everything. I mean, all the rock and roll stories you read about. We were there. We saw a lot of it. We were involved in a lot of it to some degree or another, and they were fantastic times, crazy times. I mean, I was with Keith Moon the night he died, for example. Yeah,
Uh,
but it's a sad thing. But I was at a party and he was there, and I was sitting with him, But you know, a lot of that stuff that we saw and we did was just you met people all the way by, you know, hanging out with Jeff Beck in his hotel room and talking about guitars and the good old days, you know, good fun.
Blackmore, yeah. So he was important for your band because he also helped you to get a recording deal, and you had
Yes.
a jam session with him. How you recall this?
Well, you know, we used to force ourselves onto, we would turn up at people's shows. Like we would come to a Yes show and we weren't booked on the bill, but we would ask them, could we play first, you know? And sometimes they would let us and sometimes they didn't, you know. But in the case of Deep Purple, they were booked and we actually had an official booking opening for them. And Richie was doing his sound check by himself, or the band was in the dressing room. And I had already set my gear up behind him. And he started playing, and I plugged my guitar in. He didn't see me. And I would play, he'd play a lick, and then I'd play a lick, copy it. And I could play the same things as he was playing. And he turned around and he was laughing, you know. Then we started jamming, and he watched our show afterwards. And he said, "Hey, do you guys have a record label deal?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I think you should get recorded, and I can give you a contact." And he gave me a phone number of a producer by the name of Derek Lawrence, who produced their first hit single, "Hush." And from that, we were introduced to MCA America, and we signed a deal with in America through that jam session. Everything came from that. And then years later, I moved to America. I was living in a little town in the middle of the woods. And it turned out that Richie Blackmore was living there too. And he had a little soccer team, football team. And I went up to him years later and I said, hey, you know, how you doing? I'm living here also. I'm British. I want to just let you probably don't realize, but you had a big impact on my career. I want to thank you for that. And he was, oh, wow, that's amazing. And he said, hey, would you like to play football? I said, yeah, why not? So we had play football. It was good. Good time.
Yeah, you said about you repeating he will play and he play, yeah. I mean, when it was 69, yeah, around 69, 1969.
70, I think. Maybe 69, 70, I think. 70, yeah.
Yeah, because he did it with Gillan on the concert, yeah. He played the tune, Gillan repeated, yeah. Maybe there was
Yes, yeah.
inspiration from you.
Yeah, I know they did that. That's right. Yeah, maybe I inspired that. Who knows?
Is your son named Ansley inspired by
Yes,
Ansley Dunbar?
yes, because one of the very first shows that we did was supporting the Ainsley Dunbar retaliation. And I thought Ainsley Dunbar was a fantastic drummer, a real drummer. And I loved his groove. And yeah, so when my second song came along, we were looking for names. I said, what about, I like the name Ainsley, you know, because I like Ainsley Dunbar. And my son became a drummer. So that was pretty cool. A very good one. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's toured all over the world too. Yeah.
He play with any famous band now or
Well, he's played with us a couple of times, but
yes.
he played well, he's good friends at Berklee School of Music were in the band MGMT. And then he also played in a band called Matuto, which was a Brazilian rock band. And not any famous rock bands that you would know of, I don't think. Yeah.
In 70s, I guess that bands make more impact on their how are they dressed, how are they look like, yeah. Nowadays, I can see that some bands just like, you know, they're going with a t-shirt with. What's your opinion about it? I mean, there was more, I can say, impact on that, on the look of the band, not only on the sound.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I think many musicians do like fashion. And we came out of the 60s where Britain in particular was very fashion conscious, you know, Carnaby Street, mods, rockers, you know, and youth cults, youth movements, you know. And so I was always aware from a young age that, you know, you had to be fashionable and you had to present, you had to have presentation, you know, with the music. It wasn't enough just to be a musician. You had to be a showman, you know. And so I enjoyed developing my image and becoming a bit of a showman, because at first I was very shy, you know. It's very intimidating when you go on stage for the first time. It's like, oh, well, I know I can play guitar. I'll focus on that, you know. But after a while, you realize the audience needs more. So yeah, I think grunge changed all that with the check shirts and more casual baggy jeans, and yeah. And the Americans have never really, you know, it was only when Kiss came along that they started to dress up. I mean, when ZZ Top opened for us, they were just looked like college boys, you know, like short hair and jeans, and then they started to see these British bands coming in with the fancy clothes, and so they thought, well, how can we do it our way? And they got the Texas hats, and then, you know, the nudie suits, and then, you know, the crazy guitars, and so it progressed. Same thing with Aerosmith, you know. Um, you know, they looked to the Rolling Stones and they saw all this flamboyant silk, and yeah, you know, let's go with that, you know. And you know, I think that you know, these big shows started to happen and it affected the music too. You know, the music had to be more geared towards stadium rock,
Mhm.
and but the British, they did pioneer a lot of that actually.
Mhm.
The Who were the ones that really got stadium rock together, the sound for
Mhm.
these big stadiums. The Americans weren't very advanced with that. They had these little amplifiers, little Fenders, you know,
Mhm.
and and the sound systems were really for public announcements, you know. Now there will be a rodeo happening, or look over there, you know, it's a guy. You know, it was the Who were hugely impactful on the American sound companies. You know, they had all the technology. They had JBL, they had Altec Lansing, but they didn't really develop it for rock.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I can say now, as we're talking about nowadays, because if we look, for example, for Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, or any Jeff Beck, you can see this picture when you hear his music, you see his face, how he looked like. Nowadays, the young bands from the 90s, maybe there's still, for example, Kurt Cobain or anyone from that period. Now we don't have such a connection between famous band and his look. I think,
That's right.
yeah, nowadays it's different, quite different.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's because there's nothing new or fresh about rock stars. You know, everybody knows what a rock star is. I think David Bowie took it to the limit. You know, but now it's just you know, we're just people just like you in the audience, but we make music, we supply the music, and that's how it goes. You know, so
Yeah.
you're exactly right.
What can you say about nowadays Wishbone Ash? What are your plans? Any album that you are working on, or maybe solo album you are planning to do, or anything like that?
Well, there's talk of us going in the studio in the summer. You know, uh, yeah, I think we have an offer to make a record, and I think we might do that. You know, we might start. Whether we complete this year, I'm not sure. But we have music, of course. You know, we always have music. That's the musician's currency. But
Mhm.
we'll see.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would like to do some new music, but I think, you know, COVID made a lot of bands decide that maybe wouldn't make albums so much, because also you can't make money making records anymore. It's got to be a labor of love, you know.
Exactly. Now the concert, of course, concert is big fun for you because you play for the people you loved your music, yeah, and it's
Yes.
always a pleasure, yeah.
Well, you know, it's my life, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's my life, and uh, what can I say? I'm not going to stop my life. You know, my life is traveling, and I'm kind of nomadic. You know, my whole life, my family, so it's all geared to rock and roll and touring. You know, and
Yeah.
touring is where all the action is now. As far as it's just like it always was for me. You know, since I was like 14, it's always been that.
I mean, as you're talking about this life on tour, you playing, you can say it's not a secret. You play for over 50 years, 60 years, maybe. Yeah,
Half a century.
half a century, yeah. And Wishbone Ash, 69, yeah, 70, 69, yeah. So it's also a long time. And you are still one of the members that's still there, and you carry on this torch, yeah, with the new band members. Uh, you know, I can say that I can compare it for the song Warrior, yeah, because you are this, you know, warrior
I am the warrior, man.
yeah.
You know, I mean, it's there's very few people that can keep up with my stamina, and also that have seen as much of rock and roll.
Uh-huh.
It's a fact. It's a fact.
How do you feel with the new band members? Because lately you have new drummer, I can say this.
Yeah. Well, we've only done 3 shows with him, but well, actually, we did 3 shows with him about 2 years ago, and so we know how he plays, and but on this tour he's come in, he's been working very hard to get familiar with all the music, and I can say it's fantastic, absolutely great. It's given us all a fresh impetus, you know, in the band, and he's a great guy, and nothing more to say. It's perfect, it seems to me.
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
lucky.
Yeah, I mean the members of your band are in this band because of the love of the Wishbone Ash music, I guess. And
Yeah,
also
yeah, yeah.
they are, you know, they are new, but somehow you get them and you know that they are the perfect people for this band. But the people that will
Yes, yeah.
carry on this.
It's my particular skill. You know, I've become a good band leader, and
Mhm,
I'm able to select the right people that can absolutely play this music well and have a feeling for it, and also live the life. You know,
mhm,
because we tour a lot. You know,
mhm.
yeah. It's you've got to be able to enjoy this traveling, and yeah, it's not for everyone. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Because
Yeah.
some musicians from your generation, they don't like this traveling. Yeah, they like playing the concert, but traveling is the most.
Some don't. No, it's true. It's true. That is absolutely true. But you know, you either like it or you don't. It's and we're very good at it. You know, the whole secret to traveling is to be very efficient, and to be smart. You have to be. You know, it's a skill.
As we're talking about also the old days, I think I don't know if comparing to the nowadays and 70s, for example, I think in 70s there was less this all this corporation stuff. Maybe of course there was big recording
Yeah.
companies, etc. But the people were more helpful for each other. The bands were more helpful. Nowadays, it's like they are competing with each other. I don't know. I think from my perspective, I see it like that. What do you think? Nowadays
I
and
think well, I see what you're saying, but I think there was always competition actually
yeah,
with
yeah.
bands,
Somehow,
but yeah, but the business, the people that were the managers um, and the record labels, they were also the same age as the bands. You know,
mhm,
before that, it was what we call Tin Pan Alley. It was more suits and old kind of gangster type people,
mhm,
really kind of scary, some of them. And then the young bands came along, and these people didn't understand the music. So then they got young managers, and then younger people started to take over the record companies, because the people in the record companies, Decca, EMI, they didn't know anything about this new music. So then
mhm,
it became a youth movement. And don't forget, we're the biggest generation that came after the war,
mhm.
the baby boomers, you know,
Yes, yes, yes.
huge generation. So it's only natural that we wanted to have our own music, our own bands, and our own business to run the music, which was very important. So it was a community. Everybody understood what rock and roll was, and so in that way, like you say, there was people helping each other out, a lot of communication. Yeah, it was more fluid.
Now it's
Yeah.
not like that, you can say, nowadays.
It's more corporate now. And musicians, it's tough for musicians because they don't have the infrastructure to help them. The top 1% are making really phenomenal money, but the rest of the 99%, they have to do their own promotion. They have to make their own music. They have no money for it, you know. But the top few bands, they get a lot of money, and that's very hard for the people coming up. That's why I hope that rock music survives, because people have to make music now in their bedrooms. It's like and you've got, you know, there's phenomenal musicians out there still, but you know they have to have a YouTube channel, or they have to have some social media presence. You know, that's not rock and roll.